We all find ourselves lost from time to time, stuck in a perpetual cycle of hardship where nothing we do seems to lead to better outcomes. Instead, attempts to rid ourselves of our problems only seem to make them worse. How do we escape such situations and lead better lives? One man and one hand may have found the answer, and it is much simpler and much more irrational than you might expect. I Lost My Body, or J'ai perdu mon corps, is a 2019 film distributed by Netflix, produced by Xilam Animation, directed and written by Jérémy Clapin in his feature debut, and based on the book Happy Hand by Guillaume Laurent. The narrative alternates between two stories. One follows a young man who is lost in life as he stumbles through misfortune and hardship. In the other, a severed hand embarks on a mission to reunite with the body it has lost. The film goes back and forth between different stories, perspectives, and points in time, with relatively little dialogue and practically no verbal explanation as to what takes place, why things happen, and what it all means. The story is esoteric and doesn't hold your hand, but as it demonstrates, analyzing what took place and piecing together the underlying realities can be an important step on the path to escaping oneself. Naoufel is a young man, originally from Morocco. His right hand guides him and us through his life, the good and the bad. As a child, he aspired to be an astronaut and a musician, taking inspiration from his parents. They clearly loved him as shown through their interactions, which Naoufel tends to record, and they supported him in his endeavors to what seemed to be a bright future. But a pesky fly gets in the way. Naoufel's happy life is cut off when an accident kills his parents, forcing him to live in France with an uncle and cousin. As an adult, he works an unfulfilling pizza delivery job he's bad at, and he's very lonely in his life. His boss dislikes him, he isn't shown to have any friends, and even his adoptive family seems dismissive of him at best and resentful of him at worst. This all changes, or at least seems to change, when one rainy night delivering pizza leads Naoufel to meet a customer over an apartment intercom named Gabrielle. She's initially frustrated by him. Frustrated that the delivery is late, that he doesn't practice proper delivery etiquette, and that he can't figure out how to reach her apartment. However, when Naoufel says that Gabrielle should order another pizza because this one was damaged in the accident that made him late, her tone changes from that of exasperation to concern, now more worried about his well-being than the pizza's. This is the first time in his adult life we see someone being genuinely considerate to Naoufel rather than putting up with him because they have to. This, the two's friendly banter, the discussion about Gabrielle's apartment, which Naoufel sees as desirable, and other surface-level similarities like listening to music makes it easy for someone as lonely as Naoufel to become smitten with her. Knowing that Gabrielle is a librarian, Naoufel attempts to meet her in person. However, his self-conscious nature makes him uncertain how to do so, thinking she wouldn't be interested in an incompetent pizza deliverer. He almost gives up, but seeing Gabrielle rub her neck with her left hand, complimenting his right, makes him see the light and is the final push that convinces him to pursue her. His strategy? Follow Gabrielle to her residence, and spend time with her under the false pretense that he's simply someone seeking an apprenticeship with Gabrielle's uncle Gigi, with his plan being to ultimately reveal the truth of who he is through a grand romantic gesture. Obviously, this is a naive way to go about this, but it's not a surprising tactic coming from him. You see, Naoufel was a man with very little confidence in himself. This all stems from the deaths of his parents, which he contributed to by distracting his dad from the road while recording him. Especially considering his age at the time, Naoufel blamed himself for the accident. He tries to avoid pain by staying away from anything that might cause it, including interpersonal bonds. His cousin Ralph even mentions to Gabrielle that family makes Naoufel uncomfortable. This is because Naoufel sees himself as a threat to those he gets close to. He instead prefers isolation, separating himself from others not only by avoiding confrontation with them, but also by drowning out the outside world with things such as his interest in music. This is why he's drawn to secluded settings like Gabrielle's high-up apartment, which is compared to an igloo on the North Pole. Naoufel is similarly drawn to the sound of wind because being able to hear it implies peace and isolation. However, this habit of cutting himself off from his surroundings makes Naoufel distractible and prone to mistakes to make things worse for others and himself. Our first examples of this are him being repeatedly late delivering pizza, having numerous close calls on the road, and interrupting his cousin Ralph having sex because he didn't notice the sign on the door. This distractibility is shown consistently throughout the film with his general obliviousness and klutziness. And this habit comes to a head in more serious instances, like not realizing that Gigi is sick. In turn, these mistakes make Naoufel feel worse about himself and even more avoidant of the world around him. And so, he keeps spinning in circles through a vicious cycle. He's bad at his job, his naive, indirect strategy for getting close to Gabrielle ends up pushing her away, and of course his tendency to ignore his surroundings leads him to accidentally amputating his hand. Even when he tries to be better, his poor habits hold him back. Naoufel is his own worst enemy. His low self-esteem, his poor social skills, his anxieties, his drowning out the world around him, and his distractibility all culminates to create someone who's trapped in a prison of his own creation. How could he possibly escape from himself? The answer may lie with something conducting its own escape, his hand. The second story follows Naoufel's right hand, which the screenplay names Rosalie. An interesting name choice. Why a feminine name, and why that name specifically? One reason for the feminine name is that the filmmakers wanted Naoufel and the hand to somewhat contrast one another, as a means of making the hand stand out as its own character. On top of that, I believe that giving it a name associated with the opposite gender associates Naoufel's hand with love or desire, and roses in particular are a flower often associated with love. The connection between love and Naoufel, and his hand in particular, already makes some sense because of Gabrielle, but this idea will become more pertinent as we analyze this film further. In any case, Rosalie escapes from a lab, and this story follows her endeavor to reunite with Naoufel. One of the big questions this film leaves you with is whether or not Rosalie's story is actually occurring. If you ask me, Rosalie is simply a metaphor. For what? Well, let's examine the encounters she has. Rosalie's journey is punctuated by numerous highs and lows. She's constantly in danger and encountering hardship. A pigeon tries to push her off a roof, a pack of rats tries to eat her, she falls into a frozen body of water, just to name a few. On the other hand, she also has more positive encounters. Examples include stopping to listen to the blind pianist's music, entertaining and later comforting an infant, and experiencing the illusion of flying through space. Rosalie's experiences are those of pain and of love, much like Naoufel's. I believe that Rosalie represents Naoufel's lingering regrets about his past, what was and what could have been, and how said mindset exasperates his problems. When we're following Rosalie, we're following Naoufel as he ruminates on his circumstances. That's why she's retracing his footsteps through numerous set pieces, and why many parallels are drawn between the two. Rosalie trying to escape the lab is Naoufel planning his own escape. Rosalie trying to reunite with her owner is Naoufel trying to hold on to his old ways. Rosalie experiencing occasional glimpses of beauty is Naoufel reflecting on the positive experiences that could have been. And Rosalie constantly getting hurt is Naoufel facing his own pain. Even relatively minor details are similar. Rosalie and Naoufel both frequently end up in vehicle-related accidents. Rosalie interrupts two firebugs mating, much like how Naoufel interrupted Ralph having sex. Rosalie submerges herself in an isolating atmosphere, much like Naoufel would do, and Rosalie encounters a flipped-over toy car in a parallel to the accident, among other instances. Rosalie's story isn't really occurring, which is why most of the world seems oblivious to her. The only characters that see Rosalie are ones that Naoufel can relate to: a young boy in a car, a drunk, and a disabled man with a passion for music. They see Rosalie because Naoufel is looking at himself. It's worth noting that the library Gabrielle works at is called the Guy du Maupassant Library, named after the author whose writings often involved psychological struggles and their negative influence on his characters, often using supernatural phenomena as a metaphor for such things. Remind you of anything? Rosalie's journey is a metaphor for Naoufel's rumination over his own cyclical struggles, his insecurities, his remaining stuck in his non-constructive ways, his willful isolation making him oblivious to the world around him, his making things worse for himself, and his regrets of it all. Naoufel's hand is tied to his parents' deaths, something he feels immense regret over and understandably struggles to forgive himself for. Many of the things Rosalie encounters represent the things Naoufel wishes he could do but no longer can with his hands being amputated. When listening to the pianist, the scene is intercut with Naoufel imagining himself playing piano, and with him looking through memorabilia that reminds him of his past interests. When Rosalie flies between buildings, the sensation itself, plus the lights from the traffic, creates the illusion of flying through space. Another interest of Naoufel's that is punctuated by the shots of the astronaut. The scene where Rosalie bonds with the baby is a much more fundamental example, showing the desire to connect with others through touch and intimacy. The hand is given a feminine name because associating it with the opposite gender, and with roses, associates it with love, and we can see how this journey showcases Naoufel's own affections. Rosalie's encounters show Naoufel dwelling on what could have been, remaining stuck in his past regrets, and feeling bad about himself, the exact mindset that makes him repeat his mistakes by not being conscientious, and that ultimately makes him amputate his hand. And after that, he of course feels like his desires are now impossible, whether or not they really are, since of course Naoufel accentuates the negative. So that brings us full circle to the dilemma I posed earlier. How can Naoufel escape and live a happier, more fulfilling life? The solution is an unconventional one. There are two exchanges vital to understanding this story. The first is the conversation at the beginning of the movie that Naoufel has with his father.
Comment on fait pour attraper une mouche?
Faut viser à côté. Elle sera toujours plus rapide que toi. Si tu vises là où elle est, le temps d'y arriver, elle y sera plus. Faut viser là où elle s'y attend pas. Pas là où elle est, mais là où elle sera. J'ai pas dit que c'était facile. On gagne pas tous les coups. C'est la vie.
What Naoufel's dad says is not only a reasonable answer to the literal question of how to catch a fly, but it hides a truth that Naoufel eventually figures out in his own life. If you're trying to achieve something and the straight and narrow that seems second nature to you isn't yielding results, the world keeps spinning, leaving you behind, stuck in your ways. Adding that it isn't easy and that you won't always win is him saying that the path you seek often requires dealing with hardship, a lesson Naoufel understands but doesn't fully accept or apply until after he's reached his lowest point. When Naoufel tries to catch a fly while doing carpentry, he's trying the same old tactic of aiming where it is, still stuck in his pattern of behaviors. And of course, this results in misfortune for him, in this case getting his hand amputated. And to add insult to injury, he didn't even catch it. The fly escapes from his severed clenched hand because he still hasn't learned. This accident is the culmination of Naoufel's pattern of behavior. The second key exchange is Naoufel's conversation with Gabrielle regarding fate.
Est-ce que tu crois au destin?
Comme si tout était écrit d'avance, qu'on suivait une sorte de trajectoire, et qu'on pourrait rien changer.
On croit qu'on peut, mais non, c'est qu'une illusion. À moins de faire un truc complètement imprévisible et irrationnel. C'est le seul moyen de conjurer le sort, pour de bon.
Un truc comme quoi?
Je sais pas, n'importe quoi. Là, tu marches tranquille, tu fais semblant d'aller là, tu fais une petite feinte comme un dribble, un écart, et hop, tu sautes sur la grue. Un truc improvisé, que tu devrais pas faire, que t'aurais pas dû faire, mais que t'as bien fait de faire parce qu'au final, ça t'a amené ailleurs. Et tu regrettes pas.
Et après? Une fois que t'as dribblé le destin, tu fais quoi?
Tu t'arranges pour pas qu'il te rattrape. Tu fonces tête baissée et tu croises les doigts.
Naoufel is recontextualizing what his father told him years ago. He's not talking about literal fate here. He's describing self-fulfilling prophecies, much like the vicious cycles he finds himself in, an appropriate analogy for fate. At the end of the movie, with seemingly nothing left to lose, Naoufel does something completely unpredictable and irrational. He jumps from a rooftop to the crane, with only one hand no less. Before now, Naoufel never would have done something like this as he would have expected to fall. But by swallowing his fears, changing his trajectory, and taking a leap of faith, he's changed his life. Notice how happy he is upon succeeding the jump? It's easily the happiest we see him in the entire film. It's because he accomplished something difficult without relying on his hand, without regrets. In fact, this is the only shot in the film where you see Naoufel without his right hand present in some way. On a snowy landscape by an igloo, Naoufel has found peace, but not peace as he envisioned it. By leaving his hand, his past, behind, he can lead a new, more fulfilling life. Recording his jump over what was once the recording of his parents' deaths is his way of acknowledging that he's changed for the better, replacing his greatest regret with his greatest accomplishment. This metamorphosis is why he turns away from Rosalie when he's just about to reunite with her. It's why Rosalie gives up on pursuing him, and it's why Naoufel has seemingly vanished after this jump, because Naoufel as we've known him is gone. Hence the final sequence of the movie is young Naoufel seeing the light that lies beyond his right hand before getting up and leaving behind his print in the sand, an imprint of the past, a past he loses for a brighter future. Combining these two ideas, we find the film's central theme. If you're stuck in a vicious cycle of your own creation, you'll never get anywhere by ignoring that reality and relying on the same tricks that got you stuck in that cycle to begin with. To escape, you must go against your nature. The solution to Naoufel's problems was simple all along. This story should have been simple, but Naoufel made it more complicated. He comes to this epiphany by studying his past as visualized by Rosalie's journey. He used to try blocking out this train of thought because of how painful it was, and as a result, he only became increasingly lost. But like his dad pointed out, success isn't easy and is often preceded by repeated, sometimes painful, misfortune. By forcing himself to face and to deal with his pain, Naoufel is able to learn from his experiences, realize what he needs to change to improve his circumstances, and to leave his past in the past. Rosalie never would have gotten far if she hadn't taken on her own difficult, often painful reflections and leaps of faith, which through his introspection Naoufel realizes as a necessary step. But it's only a single step, and not the final one, which is to move on. He escaped his cycle and bettered himself by taking that last step and ultimately leaving behind his hand, his regrets from the past. Naufel's hand may have lost its body, but its body is better off without it.